Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the Tired Boys podcast here for our 2024 Belgian Grand Prix review at Spa-Francorchamps. I would argue one of the best circuits on the calendar. Aaron, good to see you. How are you feeling about this weekend's race?
Good to see you too. I love Spa as well. It's a great track. You have some really high speed sections going up the hill and everything. You have some pretty technical parts of it and lots of overtaking opportunities. Whether or not that happens, I think the dirty air has something to say about it. But yeah, I really enjoyed this past week's race. I felt like there was a lot of good competition, a lot of good storylines, and kind of plot thickening as the season is coming here to the summer break. So I'm excited to get into it.
Yeah, and interestingly, and we'll pick up here right after the quick hitters, but just a little teaser here. Interestingly, got some roster moves before the summer break, where my prediction was after the summer break, likely, or maybe during. So surprising in that regard. We can kind of hit those in just a little bit. Aaron, I know you have a couple of good quick hitters for us here this week. So why don't you start us off here for the episode?
Yeah, so to start us off, I mean, we're just going to keep it in the F1 vein for now. There wasn't too much that I saw that was piquing my interest outside of this week's race weekend, but a couple of the stories that came out ahead of the race. First off was that Max was being basically that Red Bull was going to restrict him sim racing and whatnot ahead of the race weekends and everything. No more late night grinds on iRacing for the boy, which he very quickly kind of turned down, and he was like, no, like I'm an adult, I can control what I'm doing, like that had nothing to do with anything, so we're good. But I just found that amusing that was being discussed. Helmut Marko, of course, just like jabbering on to whoever the reporter who's just like stationed outside of his house to chat with him when he gets coffee or tea or whatever on the daily basis and spill the beans. Yeah, a kind of amusing thing, especially when, I mean, he's been doing this for a long time. He's one of the best drivers, if not the best currently in the world. And so kind of an amusing little lead up to the weekend.
Oh yeah, I was having a good chuckle about this, honestly, because like there was a time now gone, it seems like, where drivers had these very I guess you could say, like, flamboyant personalities, the penchant for like partying and kind of living a you could say, like, a rock star's lifestyle. There were some drivers who definitely embraced that, and I imagine, some people thought it was pretty cool that they could, do that kind of thing and then rock up and, put on a pretty good show in a Formula One car. It shows just the stark difference in eras. It feels like where, like, that used to be the thing, and now it's like, oh no, our driver is like driving more, but at night, and that's the risky behavior here, and that's like what we can't have. It's like, oh my gosh, like it.
Yeah, he's not out
Sure.
at a club till 3 in the morning, getting drunk and partying and everything. He's sim racing till 3 in the morning. Like,
Right. And sure, there's an argument to be said for, taking his focus away from, the task at hand, you could say, but man, there are just like much, much worse things that I believe this individual could be doing ahead of a race weekend than sim racing. So I thought it was a talking point, or I thought it was silly that it was a talking point. And if I understood correctly, it was coming from a gentleman primarily that you're like not even a fan of on the broadcast really anyway. Like there was really only like one or two voices that I heard levying concern.
That was, I mean, those were the only voices on the broadcast, but this was like in news articles and like being shot all over Twitter and online over the past week or so as well, where it was just such a silly like thing to me. And I think the difference in era is like a very good like way to talk about it, because when you look at other sports, I mean, people talk about Babe Ruth and the home run records and all of these things, and are like, oh, and that man was just eating hot dogs in the dugout and hitting pitches off of plumbers or whatever. And I mean, even back into the 90s, I think there were guys in the NHL who were still like just ripping cigs in between periods in the locker room and like drinking beers and stuff like that. Like, I mean, F1, it wasn't that long ago that like Marlboro and like cigarette companies and all were like title sponsors on some of the most famous cars out there. So this, the times have definitely changed between the good old days and now, but I don't think that this is a concerning thing. But yeah, it was amusing hearing it brought up on the broadcast as well by my two favorite broadcasters. So I mean,
it's a condemning thing to be sim racing late into the night. I'm concerned about this young man's focus, to be sure.
I mean, did you see the bags under his eyes? It's just apparent that
agreed
that he's just a reckless individual there. But yeah, very very funny to kind of talk about. But the other kind of bigger stories outside of driver lineups going into the weekend were Max taking a 10-place grid penalty with the new engine, going over his allotment, and then Yuki had a 60-place grid penalty, which he was very just like amusing, I guess, about when he was asked about it ahead of the race weekend and all, and afterwards joking about how he had started in Zandvoort and finished P17, being a pretty good day. So definitely just kind of an amusing thing that they dole out these massive grid penalties for all the new components and all, or that they just like keep stacking it. But I guess you have to keep track in case someone else takes even more components or something, and you have to figure out where they kind of even out. But
yeah, that's a good point. Like you calculate past, like I'll use the phrase, and this isn't very precise, but you calculate past zero to determine, like you're saying, if there are multiple teams having to take engine penalties, you got to figure out which one is like the most egregious. Even if 20 is like as far back as you can go, you got to figure out like, okay, well this person's actually 19th and they're 20th.
Yeah, say like Max takes if they called it like a back of the grid penalty or something like that, Max takes a 20-place penalty instead, but Yuki, his is 60 places, so yeah, to I guess decide where that evens out. But
right, because otherwise you would just have to do it on some weird like who like
it would probably just be quali pace, I guess, like. But,
or who files their changes first, because I imagine every team has to file reports to the FIA saying these are the parts that were wrong or damaged or done, these are the new parts that were going on. I imagine it would be some type of like first come first served basis kind of thing, but this kind of alleviates that case where they just calculate past 20. Totally makes sense to me, but agreed, kind of amusing.
Like just a silly thing to look at, especially on a weekend where only two people are taking those kind of penalties. But yeah, that was really all the quick hitters for the week. We have a good bit to talk about here in the race, but we'll start with our driver and team roster shifting with you work here. So first off, Bruno Famine, it was reported that he'll be leaving Alpine. I don't believe it was effective immediately, but that I believe maybe towards the end of the season. There were reports that the high-tech GP boss, I believe from Formula 2 with high-tech, is one of the lead people to potentially take that spot. But, of course, super early on, there's plenty of people who might get that opportunity over at Alpine.
Yeah, that's an interesting change, and as I understand, it was kind of like a um, kind of a sudden thing for him as well. Didn't it like come during the press conference or something? Am
Yeah,
I understanding that properly?
I think so. It was like just in kind of in the middle of the race weekend, it was announced that he'll be departing at Alpine, and so just
Hmm.
in general, the the team is struggling. They've gotten some like better highs as we've gotten into the season and all, but to be transitioning again after you just had Bruno take over the team this past year from Otmar, it's a lot of change in a short amount of time, and I feel like that lack of consistency is really going to just create more difficulty at a already struggling team who's potentially losing their engine manufacturing and going to have to be a customer team. Like there's just a multitude of issues there, and I don't think just kicking the guy who's the face of the operation out every time is really the solution.
Yeah, it makes me wonder how long it takes to like what's the average for a team principal to like indicate change? I mean, when um Fred Vasseur came in for Ferrari,
Mm-hmm.
they made like it felt like a pretty quick pivot. So I wonder if like, maybe you don't need a whole lot of time to see change. Maybe you kind of get a feel for like, maybe this isn't the right direction. But yeah, it seems a bit like, I don't know. I'll use the word, yeah, I'm not sure. Not like preempting is not the right word, but like premature, I think is the right word. But I'm definitely not an expert on these things. So yeah, it just makes me wonder like, okay, what is the goal window to, exert some change? What do you think?
I feel like it. I feel like it would take the majority of a season to see the change that the new team principal is. So if a new team principal starts at the beginning of the season, I don't think that you're even going to see their effects on the team till after the summer break. Like so, more than halfway through the season. Um, there's so much that is being planned for these cars and everything from the previous season as you're looking at data, looking at the new regulations, kind of laying out your plans and preparation. I feel like there's so much of that happens leading up to the season that by the time a new team principal starts, gets acquainted with everything, is really into the swing of things. It takes a while. Like I don't. I guess you could necessarily see if a guy's not the right guy, but I don't know if that's the case here. I feel like it was very brief.
Yeah, very brief, but I mean, hey, they're like, yeah. these types of decisions are way beyond me. I'll say I am surprised, but I'm looking forward to hopefully that it means maybe an uptick in, I'll just say, momentum from the from the Alpine camp.
Yeah, I mean, you can always hope for the change, and now that they're kind of, I think, closer to solidifying their lineup for this coming season. I think that is a good place to kind of be getting into the preparation for the upcoming season, and this is the time that you're making that decision. It at least lets you plan better, even if this year's car, which I just don't think that they're going to be too frequently fighting for points based on how the season's gone so far. I think that is, I guess, time to start an upswing maybe for the upcoming season.
Do you remember? It would have been like the Mazepin era of Haas pretty recently, where part of the conversation was like, we are scrapping development for this year. Like, we're not even gonna
Yeah.
we're done developing this car, and we're just looking ahead to whatever next year, like the following year was. I wonder how much, or here's a better question to ask: how many teams are already looking at that as like just what's happening, where they're like, we're probably out of real contention in some way? I wonder how many teams have begun just looking at the next the next season, as opposed to thinking very hard about development paths, for this current year.
I mean, it's tough because the majority of teams are still in a decently tight fight. I think Aston Martin is the only team that's kind of in no man's land to some extent, where there's not much potential, or it's not super likely that they'll get caught, but not likely at all that they're going to catch anyone ahead of them. And when you're battling for millions of dollars of prize money with the championships, I mean, Kick Sauber being at zero, I mean, they're only 4 points behind Williams. That's one crazy rainy weekend or something that Valtteri just crushes it. I don't feel like anyone is like specifically out of reach, so I can't imagine them doing like Haas. Basically, if I remember correctly, scrapped, like, I think it was mid 2022, and they said, we're like not introducing any more upgrades this season, and we're doing the bare minimum for next year and planning like a year and a half out for the upcoming car and everything.
Right.
So that, I think, was an extreme measure where they were like, we are at the bottom. We just had Mazepin and Schumacher just destroy our budgeting and everything for any sort of progress with this car project and everything, and they're like, okay, old reliable Nico and K Mag, please don't crash, and we'll give you a solid car in 2024, which they picked up a lot of points with. So I can't say it didn't work, but I don't think any team is probably throwing in the towel quite yet on that.
Hey, fair enough. I'm just thinking some of these scenarios just look really dire, just in the sense of, like, dire's the wrong word. It's just it's a plateau, it's a stagnation, it's a staying in the same place. But in some way you realize, well, they're kind of like moving up along with the other teams, just like below the curve in some way, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a tough thing to parse out all the details, but yeah, I'm just examining the Bruno Famine scenario and some of the like Kick Sauber conversations that we've had. It just makes me think back to that period and just like it just kind of reminds me of that in some way, and just
Yeah.
wondering like where teams are in that kind of thinking.
Definitely, and I think it's a interesting question to ask because not I don't think most teams would also be as blatantly upfront about it as Haas was. Haas was like, we know we're like the worst, and we're just warning you that it's gonna be like this for a bit. Like it was just giving us fair warning on it, but yeah, I think that there could be teams that are starting to try and plan a little bit more for the upcoming seasons. I'm sure that Williams, even though they're in P9 and not too far out of fighting for P8 there, they we'll talk about it in a minute, but they have their driver lineup solidified and all, and I think that gives them a good just bump in energy to with the new signing and everything to hopefully prepare for the upcoming season. But before we talk about that move, ahead of the weekend, it was announced that Esteban Ocon was going to be signing with Haas on a multi-year deal. Funny enough, just coincidence, but Ocon has been just following any seat that Nico Hulkenberg leaves, basically, for the past few opportunities. In 2016, when Nico Hulkenberg left Force India, Ocon joined in 2017. Then in 2019, when Hulkenberg left Renault, Ocon joined Renault. Now Hulkenberg leaving Haas and Ocon joining Haas. So just an open seat that's being left behind and warmed up nicely for Ocon by a good guy, Nico Hulkenberg.
Yeah, who's getting the better of that little do-si-do that's going on?
I feel like Hulkenberg, and it could just be an age, like, veteran kind of status thing where he's just been the guy who has moved first, I suppose, to leave that seat available. So,
Sure.
of course, anytime a driver's leaving a team on their own choice, I assume that they're looking at it as an upgrade. So,
Well, yeah.
I guess that would be Nico going for the upgrade. I mean, that's what you would hope for, unless you're really being like in your Carlos Sainz position where the Ferrari's just like, yeah, bud, we love you, but like they let us have Lewis. Like, what are we supposed to do?
I mean that truly is that'd be tough. That'd be tough.
Yeah, it's not the best place to be, but Ocon's been finding ways to pick up drives and everything, and the Haas car has looked much more competitive than it had. It's a decent bit ahead of Alpine right now. So I think that's a good move for Ocon at the moment as well. So I think that's a pretty good spot for him and good opportunity to bring that veteran leadership with a rookie driver coming on board as well.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. So Haas. So what's the Haas lineup for next year then? So it's Ocon and
Ollie Behrman.
That's right. I keep forgetting. Yeah, that's right. Okay, gotcha. So Ocon and Behrman. All right, all right. So then Hulk is with now. Hulk is going to
Sauber, but
Sauber.
Not.
They're
sure
going to be Audi though.
Got to be Audi in 26. Yep.
Right. Okay. Gotcha. So in 25 they'll still be Kick Sauber with
Yep.
Hulk, and we're still waiting who their second driver is.
Yep.
Do we know where? Do we know where either Joe or Valtteri will be?
We do not.
Whoa. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
So still some things to learn in that regard. Interesting. Okay, gotcha. But dude, the
Yeah.
big one though, the big
Oh,
one,
huge. So
the big
Carlos
one.
Sainz going to Williams. The domino has fallen. Now the final three seats can get decided, and at this point, I feel like it's just going to keep meandering at the same pace. All season I was like, there's all these seats open and everyone wants Carlos Sainz, and then like slowly here and there seats got picked up, and now there's not that many dominoes behind it to fall. So I think it wasn't as explosive of a silly crazy season for the driver swaps as I expected, but it's not over.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, silly season. Like, what can really happen to make it silly? That's a strong word. Silly is a very strong word. Es-
I
Especially for something as like, I mean, dude, these roster swaps, it's not like they're like, literally popping champagne bottles and like, going to circuses. Like, these are
but
buttoned up suit motherfuckers sitting on tables. Like, I don't know.
but I mean I when you have so many seats that are just available, the potential for just swaps all over the place to happen are there. Like there's the opportunity for it, but then like you end up with we've got three different teams, so six of the drivers that are the same exact lineup for next year right now as they were this year with the Aston Martins, McLarens, and Red Bulls. But when you have all of that, you have a lot of these young drivers in the wings. I mean, when Lewis took Carlos's seat, there were eight, nine teams that probably threw offers out at Carlos to try and get him. I mean, I can pretty much think of every team being brought up in the discussion of Carlos Sainz at some point during this season. And the fact that he just like waited so long, I think if he had just, even if he had gotten an offer from Williams right off the bat and had been like, you know what, that's where I want to be, and took it, then I think everything would have just toppled so quickly. It would have been this mad flurry of just this team picked up this guy and that guy and that guy, but so many teams were just sitting there waiting on Sainz for a while to make up his mind that it just slowly teams were like, yeah, I don't really feel like waiting anymore, and started to just pick up other drivers in the meantime. But it had the potential early on to possibly be this just crazy, like, just mad dash for drivers. So
Okay, in that context, I definitely understand it. I feel like in my mind, when I hear the word silly, I think of like handshake shockers and like silly string and like dunce caps and stuff like that. And it's like, I don't know. I don't know if I would call anything in Formula One silly.
just all these potential options, and it started off so strong with Lewis going to Ferrari. You're like, the world is my oyster. Like,
Right.
anything can happen, and then not that much did, which is fine. But there was a lot of anticipation.
Anticipation for sure, but yeah, the big domino falls with Sainz, Carlos Sainz to Williams. Yeah, reading the interview that they did with James Vowles about the signing, the one thing that really stood out to me was they talked a lot about it not being a stopgap he was not willing to sign a 1-year contract with Carlos. If they were going to join up together, it was going to be for a kind of longer haul project type scenario. And I think Valls had to make sure that Carlos Sainz was kind of, prepared to maybe drive not so great of a car right away, but be part of helping them work towards having a competitive car. The thing that's part of that stood out to me was stating the states of teams that Carlos left them in, and James Vowles believed he always left teams better off than when he joined, and he just obviously wanted that for this, I think, very important signing at a time for Williams where they lost a figurehead individual very recently, the upper management changing, shifting around, suffering like one of the worst runs of form they've ever had. Like it's got to be tough, and a signing like that must feel pretty good to get one of the, I don't know who you're talking to, but one of the hottest names in Formula One right now. I mean, that's got to feel really good. So I think that interview with Fowles was really interesting. It showed kind of, what these conversations must consist of trying to bring somebody on to your, they use the word project. I thought that was great. Like, it's not just they're not just driving cars around. They're like they're working at something, and that's kind of cool.
And I think that Williams, with their new leadership and everything over the past bit and all, and showing that they are not that far behind some of these higher up teams in the standings than them, signing a really solid driver like Carlos, I mean, thinking back in all of my time watching F1, I don't think that there's really been a time where there hasn't been, or where there's been this solid of a lineup at Williams in the past 7 years or so. I mean, you had Latifi and Russell for a number of years. Then you have Albon, you have Sargent. I feel like I'm still missing someone else who's with them, but
was De Vries on Williams, or was he on the?
He was AlphaTauri.
Right. Okay.
But yeah, either way, like there's been just a number of years where they haven't had two veteran drivers who are very solid, very consistent, just experienced in that position. They've been kind of this farm system a little bit, and now I feel like they're stepping out of that with two really good drivers for their lineup for the upcoming season. I mean, Albon and Sainz is a really great pairing. If I look at the other teams and their lineups and everything, I rate them super, super highly based on just what we've seen from both of them in their performances and everything. So there's only a couple lineups that I would really put ahead of them, and it would be really probably the Red Bulls, Ferraris, and McLarens at this point.
Sure.
So I think that's a pretty exciting lineup for them. I think the other interesting thing with Sainz, he had been a big target of Audi for 2026, so him going on a multi-year contract with Williams, I think it'll be interesting to see what Sauber does. I could imagine them keeping Zhou on for another year, and then potentially even going for the Mick Schumacher back to F1 track with him being a German driver. The Schumacher name would be huge for Audi, just in terms of sponsorships and everything, and that's a whole nother component to this. So that leaves that door open for a little more flexibility in 2026 potentially.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thinking about Sainz and Albon as a team, as a driver pairing, the anime of that scenario would be both ex teammates of Max Verstappen. They do some type of teamwork pact where they're like, honestly, individual results, we don't care. We are hunting Max down. And as a racing duo, they ignore the team battle and they just say, we're not coming for victory. We're coming for Max. Because therein, if we come for Max, we're winning,
And
right? By
the
extension.
and the goal of that by the end of the season is for their combined point total to beat Max.
Right. And then then individually, right, they couldn't beat him, but together they can take down Max where
with
where both of them had a chance by themselves, but they realized like no, two X's of Max Verstappen is better than one.
Yeah, with the power of VC money and and
Yep.
friendship, they can
Yep.
take that Williams to the middle of the top.
Right. And how they would make it exciting is they would animate Formula One as though there was like drifting kind of
Oh,
things,
of course,
right?
yeah.
Where they're like, because you got to have the power slides around corners and stuff. So it'd be Formula One cars, but drifting with like the speed boost on the ground.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the anime of this roster lineup that I'm really looking forward to.
I dig it. I'm about it. So if someone wants to make that, I will definitely watch a couple seasons at least. So
At least.
give me something to binge. But this now leaves just three lineups that are incomplete with some I guess expectations a little bit of who's going to fill those seats. But Mercedes, we know Antonelli is the top prospect there. For Alpine, I think now they start to look more at Jack Doohan as their most likely person to fill that spot, coming from their reserve driver position, the Alpine Academy and everything. I think that makes sense. So another rookie in F1 potentially for this coming year. Then we have I guess we still have two others. We don't officially know for the RB V-Carb seat who's going to be next to Yuki. And I think it's expected to be Ricardo, but now things are weird with Red Bull, so who knows? And then Hulkenberg's teammate over at Kick Sauber.
Yeah, a whole lot to kind of figure out in regards to the Red Bull. I'm kind of in the camp of like I'm gonna just ice the conversation and just wait to see what happens
Yeah,
because it
every
feels like
week
kind
it's
of
just everyone's names are thrown out.
yeah, the intention and direction kind of changes. So yeah, tough to understand what's going on there.
Yeah, so a lot of just unassuredness. I don't think that's a word, but unknowns, I guess, would be easier way to say
Sure.
it with the driver lineups. But yeah, that pretty much wraps out the U work here and driver team lineup segment.
Pretty huge, I would say.
Yeah.
But yeah, before we get into the next segment of the show, just wanted to say thank you all for listening. Just wanted to extend our appreciations. We're looking to hit the 100 subscriber goal here by the end of the Formula One season. So if you're enjoying the show, hit that like, hit that subscribe button. If you're listening on Spotify, leave a 5-star review. It really goes a long way. So yeah, we just appreciate you tuning in and listening and showing your support.
Yeah, so we appreciate it a lot and are hoping to hit that goal. So definitely, like Justin said, like, subscribe. But we will move along into the full race weekend here, starting off with the Formula 3 races this weekend. It's interesting because it was so like infrequent towards the beginning of the season that we were having F3 and F2 kind of mixed in with the Formula One weekends, and now I feel like it's been just a blitz of race after race after race that we've had since June, pretty much. It's been almost every race weekend we have F2 and F3, so the battles are heating up pretty well. With F3, we have one race weekend left at Monza, so after the summer break, we'll have the final race of the season there. But it's been, yeah, like I think the last 4 race weekends we've had F3 and F2.
Well, that makes a whole lot of sense. I mean, it's a whole lot of European nationals in F2 and F3, and this recent part of the season is like a large number of European circuits,
Yeah.
and so like without doing too much thinking about it, that like would kind of make sense to me. But also the factor of like they like F2 has like half the amount of races that F1 has, and then Formula 3 is like another percentage of that. I think F3 is like
I think it's
seven
a
or eight
third or something
races.
like that. Yeah.
Gotcha, yeah, something close to that. But yeah, it's been pretty interesting to have each of these weekends have the supporting categories. Yeah, it's quite fun.
Yeah, and that does make sense because looking at all the races that they've gone to for F3, Sakir in Bahrain and
Yep.
Melbourne are the only two outside of Europe that they went to.
Okay.
So it does make sense that they would have, but I didn't even think about that. I was just like, oh yeah, we had like 2 races in March, and then we didn't race again until May. Like that's
Well, because
just
they
a
probably didn't hit
long.
the U.S.
Yeah,
tracks, Canada.
exactly. But just initially looking at it, I'm like, that was a huge gap. So yeah, it does make more sense that way. But the F3 title fight has been just really tight over the past few weeks. We had Lindblad, Browning, Mini, and Fornaroli, who have all been kind of competing at the top of the championship there. Fornaroli's been really on the biggest push of late and took over the championship lead this weekend after just a couple of strong performances we talked about at Hungary, that Mini, Browning, and Lindblad barely got any points. Fornaroli picked up a lot there to bring himself up into contention, and then had a great weekend this weekend.
Yeah, it was unfortunate for it's Gabriella Mini,
Yeah,
I believe is how you pronounce his name. Yeah, unfortunate for him in the feature race. Early contact sends him spinning. He's able to get his car going again, but obviously a start like that, I mean, you're really out of contention. It's going to be a hard fight. So a couple of positions where you're not scooping up as many points as possible off of mistakes, unfortunate scenarios. Yeah, I mean this guy just able to make a surge on Gabriel Mini, who was, if I understand, like previously leading the championship for a decent bit.
yeah. So he was leading,
uh
and just was eclipsed, by Fornaroli by 1 point in the standings currently.
Gotcha.
But yeah, it was, I mean, 2 wet races for Formula 3. It was very just messy, especially in the feature race. There were safety cars in the first race. It was just really difficult. Mini took advantage in the first race of his all 3 rivals kind of being down or low in the points or out of the points in that sprint race. Picked up some good points with the P2, but yeah, getting spun out early in the feature race. Lindblad also got taken out in the feature race. It was definitely a tough weekend for some of those title contenders, and Fornaroli took advantage. He's really driven very, very well over the past couple of weekends to be consistent. And I think the one of the craziest things for him this year is he doesn't have a win. He has no wins in a sprint race or a feature race on the season, but has still been able to just have super super consistent performances to pick up points and pull himself to the top.
Yeah, I can't imagine that happens often where you're in, real money paying positions without, winning any races. That's got to be pretty tough, but shows, like you're saying, a solid amount of consistency where you're able to put yourself in points paying positions on a regular basis ahead of drivers that may have like more kind of up and down performances. You may just be, kind of staying consistent across the board. So yeah, that's a very interesting result to see for sure.
Yeah, and he's had multiple podiums on the season, but yeah, no wins for him, and he's I mean, 1 week away from or one race weekend away from potentially clinching the F3 title, which is just pretty impressive to see. And I think that is maybe something that some teams will look at and favor very highly compared to maybe some super high highs and really low lows. Someone who
Right.
is consistently towards the top and everything. That consistency is something that teams want to build on. So that's definitely just setting himself up for good opportunities in the future. Moving over though into Formula 2, we had a wet sprint race for the weekend in Formula 2, but it was surprisingly like pretty good through the start. We made it through without much contact or craziness in the sprint race. Behrman had a really huge first lap to pick up, I think, about 4 positions on the first lap of the race, bringing him and Antonelli into together in P7 and P8. But not much to say really about that race, with it being stopped for a red flag with an incident and being deemed too wet to continue racing.
I mean, to me, that's just a smart choice. Yeah, fans miss out on some running and the drivers miss out on running, and it decreases the amount of points paying positions for that race. Like, believe me, I get it, but specifically at that track, I think it's just best you err on the side of caution.
Yep.
Because yeah, it's a pretty treacherous circuit.
It is, and I mean, especially in the wet with the rain and everything, you have some just super high speed turns that your arrow is shifting a lot and everything. It's just it's dangerous. Even the move that Antonelli made earlier on in the race, going up the hill there. I mean, that he had his foot pinned to the floor, and all that takes is a little shift from either driver making a mistake, and that's a dangerous situation. So with the wet racing and all, I agree. I think it was the right call to make at the time.
But the feature race, now that was exciting. I mean, Aaron, it's Paul Aaron, right? Is his first name. Paul Aaron and Isaac Hadjar just literally duking it out for how many laps was it? 17 or like 15 or so?
It was a good stretch that they were just trading
Oh
it back and
man.
forth. I mean, Aaron was on pole and Hadjar was P3 to start, so both up at the front, but they were running in 1 and 2 for a long stretch of the race, trading the lead multiple times. I think there were 4 different times that they were, or I guess 2 for each of them that they were leading separately through the race. So and a very weird like start to the race too. You're on a dry circuit, but after all the rain and everything on the weekend, I think a lot of the drivers were getting a little just like antsy to be out racing on slick tires, and it was a bit of a mess. Behrman got taken out with another driver at turn one. Just lots of incidents, lots of DNFs early on in the race, but yeah, Hadjar and Paul Aaron trading the lead back and forth was fun to watch as the tires were getting in different windows, trying the undercuts and everything. It was a cool race to watch.
Yeah, but definitely anticlimactic at the end of it. I'm pretty sure it was on the last lap or the penultimate lap where Paul Aaron had some kind of mechanical failure, so he's just, out of contention right then and there, kind of all the fighting all for naught, but the person who really kind of is a winner, gainer, some type of, coming in there and scooping something up is Bortoleto. I mean, he really came into, that little, what was a 2-man battle. He made it a 3-man battle. Aaron's car dies. I mean, he's right there. Yep. So that was a nice surge there from Bortoleto as well to kind of be in that position when, Paul Aaron unfortunately has to, I guess, DNF.
Yeah, and I mean, a huge swing in the points. That's, 18 points that Paul Aaron missed out on. So he gets overtaken by Bortoleto in the standings. He would have been still 23 points back from Hadjar, but on a race weekend with a sprint race and a feature race, that's not out of reach. At this point, though, I think that it may be I think it's mathematically impossible for someone to catch up with Hadjar at this point. I think it might be if someone wins both the sprint race and the feature race with the fastest lap and Hadjar gets 0 points on the weekend, then Bortoleto might be able to take it, but it's basically locked up for Hadjar for the title fight at this point.
How many more races does Hadjar have? Like, how many more races are in the season?
I believe it's just one.
Just Monza left?
I think so. I'm double checking myself. No, I lied. The standings lied. It only showed Monza, but no, they have. I take that back. They have 4 more race weekends, so still opportunities, but it's yeah, I mean, Hadjar's lead being up to 36 points now is a pretty significant gap from where it would have been.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. That's a really tough feature race so late in the season to have happen, to be in such a not commanding position, but solid position, I would say. Yeah, that's a tough biscuit to chew on there.
Yeah, so Paul Aaron just unfortunate with his car dying on him on the last lap of the race too. After
that's what I'm saying.
P2, it was just brutal way to end that, but it's still very tight for P2 in the championship. There, 5-point gap. So a bit of racing left to go, and maybe some excitement to be seen still. But Hadjar, I feel like I know we had talked about him and had said he didn't seem as strong. I still feel that way, even though the gap, I feel like this gap is semi-artificial with with Paul Aaron going out. In the last race, it looks a lot bigger than it probably should. But it's definitely a significant lead, and so it would be exciting for him to win the championship there in F2.
Yeah, I mean, that'd be solid, and I don't know how much they're associated, but pretty sure that he's Campos Racing, I believe, which has the Red Bull livery, so I imagine they are sponsored by in some regards.
He is, yeah, he's one of the Red Bull
specifically
drivers.
Okay, that's interesting. So it's Okay, so the like affiliations are a little bit different for the other categories. There's
Yeah,
some
not
wonkiness there.
yeah. Teams themselves aren't partnered with the F1 teams, just individual drivers.
Right. Okay, that's interesting. Gotcha. So that's why they have the Red Bull livery because he himself is sponsored by. Gotcha. Okay,
Yeah.
very cool. Well, that's interesting.
So I mean, but him being in Red Bull's driver program, it just gives another kind of choice for the Red Bull team. If he wins F2, of course, he won't be able to compete in F2 anymore, so he'll have to be going somewhere, and obviously Red
Mm-hmm.
Bull doesn't want to just give up an F2 champion, so whether it's a reserve driver role or possibly vying for that seat in the V carb, it who knows, but there's still opportunities out there for him, but I think it's going to be a tough position to get a spot in F1 for next year for Hajar.
Yeah, for sure. I'm just saying, like, I think my angle was more for like another. Yeah, I think I was just going for the angle of like, man, just like another winner in the Red Bull camp.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah, I mean that's Helmut Marco knows how to pick them.
For sure, for sure.
But yeah, I mean it is. I mean for Red Bull to have the top F1 driver, it's kind of or F2 driver. It's passed around a bit over the past couple years, but to be at the top in both F1 and top driver in F2, yeah, that's another solid decision making and performance from Red Bull's program.
Yeah, and maybe not like the greatest conclusions can be drawn from that. It was just kind of a loose association there, but interesting nonetheless. But yeah, I thought it was quite an exciting weekend as far as Formula Two was concerned, especially that feature race. Kind of felt like anything could happen right up until Paul Aaron's car giving out on him. But yeah, it was a pretty exciting race up until then. But I'll tell you, it was a much different Formula One race than it was for the other categories. They had to deal with a lot of wet track and wet running, but at least for the F1 race, it was a clear, beautiful day. I bet that's as good as it gets, I think.
Yeah, the only negative with that is the fact that it did rain earlier on in the weekend, and teams I think struggled knowing how to set up the cars. But like when you're looking at a day to be driving out there, like couldn't have been better. It's perfect, dry, just gorgeous day for them out on the track. So uh, definitely could have been worse for them going into the weekend, but especially after qualifying being a bit crazy with the rain and more might be coming, but not quite yet. Oh, it'll be here in 2 minutes, 10 minutes from now. So a lot of unknowns there, but the race itself was great and just a pretty exciting race, especially with the different strategies and everything that the teams were going for.
Yeah, and part of me kind of wondered about that, where like was the amount of different, I'll say, strategy mistakes, was the amount of strategy mistakes due to the like confounding of data by them having so much wet running during the practice and having to set up for like qualifying in that regard, and then being presented with effectively 180-degree conditions for what they were like setting up for throughout the weekend. I'm curious um, how much that difference in track conditions weighs on teams on race day and like how much it factors in. I'm curious how much they're able to rely on kind of like historical data and see like how the tires have performed on similar tracks and things like this. But yeah, it definitely felt like teams were off the cuff a little bit, I would say, on Sunday.
Yeah, and it felt like teams were more so just planning out versus their rivals as opposed to maybe best strategy in the race. I mean, we saw 2 race weekends ago that I guess 2 weekends ago, 1 race ago in Hungary, the undercut was a massive advantage that the drivers were getting there, coming out of the pits and everything on their outlap. This weekend, it seemed to be as soon as one team blinked with boxing a driver, that any of the competitors around them that were in that same kind of race were reacting quickly to not get undercut, and I think that dictated a lot of kind of the game plan for the race, as opposed to, I mean, what we saw with George Russell, R.I.P. He's alive, just just disqualified. But that, I think more the historical data said 2-stop race, but that 1 stop could have been there if teams had maybe had more dry running in practice sessions and whatnot, or had not just been reacting to the drivers around them to pit super early. Because even George, I think, I mean, he was one of the first people to pit, I'm pretty sure. He pitted 6th out of all the drivers on lap 10.
And Max pitted shortly thereafter, right?
On lap 10 as well, yeah.
Yep.
But doing a different strategy. So George went 34 laps on the hard tires and everything. So it was, if those mediums had lasted a bit longer, he could have even had more pace potentially at the end there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's quite interesting. And one of the most freak things where it's like at the very same time the decision that wins him the race loses him the race.
Yeah, and it's it's so bizarre because it was a very unique instance, I guess, because there was no in lap at the end of they don't do an in lap because of how long the circuit is at the end of the race. So he didn't get to pick up all the marbles on his tires as he's going around. Like you said, wearing that rubber out on the hard tires definitely decreased the weight of the car. I mean, 1.5 kilograms is like 3 pounds. There's, that's not not much at all when it comes down to it with the vehicles. So, unfortunate that he ends up being disqualified after making a pretty bold strategy call there.
Yeah, and I think I think we got onto that talking about the difference in strategies that was coming from the difference in data that teams were going to have. But yeah, very weird thing that's like really tough to understand. So it's like a combination of the not disposable, but depleting parts on a car throughout a race. So like they brake pads, the drivers drink, things like this. They have to calculate and say like, okay, what percentage of them will be gone, factor that into the car weight. So just an awful way to lose what was a great drive and a great pivot. We hear the radio call come from George Russell saying like, we should think about the 1 stop. This is going fine. So, it seems like he made a heads up call, but it wasn't a call that the, I guess, engineers or technicians or the mathematicians or the whoever was, prepared for.
Yeah, and I mean, might as well just talk about it now, but it was funny after the race. I saw like a number of reactions online, and especially after Lewis had done his media after the race, where he was like, oh yeah, my tires were still like fine every time they told me to pit. A lot of people online were upset about Mercedes favoring George, this and that, by giving him the one stop option and not giving that to Lewis. But it was more that they didn't really give George the option. George was like, I want to do this. And George is known for doing that, where he's like in the middle of a race and he's like, hey, can we do this crazy one stop? He tried to pull that a bunch of times last year and they just were like, no dude, pit, your tires will like will shred if you you'll end up with punctures if you try to go to the end. This time they were like, okay, I guess. And they were like, hey Lewis, pit. And he's like, my tires are good. And they're like, hey, pit. And he's like, okay. Like, I didn't feel like there was some sinister plot there. But yeah, I mean, George made the bold strategy call. He wanted it, and I guess they looked at the data and were like, hey, why not?
Yeah, it seemed to make sense in the moment, but unfortunately, the weird weight thing just comes into play. But yeah, he just to punch this conversation just forward just a little bit. He's my number one loser for the weekend. Obviously, if we want to get into winners and losers,
Yeah.
that's just like big time unfortunate, horrible way to go. So like nothing he did really wrong, obviously, but yeah, just kind of like an unfortunate scenario. So he's big time loser number one for me.
Yeah, and I have Mercedes just as a whole. Like, with Lewis
Sure.
getting the win, I mean, that's obviously huge, but you are in a position where you're trying to make up ground on Ferrari, on McLaren. You have this opportunity to get the big 1-2, pick up a lot of points there, and you end up being tied in points, I think, or they eked out two more points over Ferrari, and I think they lost out to McLaren overall on the weekend. So they're not gaining or pulling themselves back into the fight there with George being disqualified, just helping out their rivals a bit.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. Give me your second loser as well.
Yeah, so my second loser, and I saw looking at your notes, but so we'll have some interesting conversations. But I had Sergio Perez. He, I, he qualified back where he should have qualified.
Right.
He's up in P3. He's in a good spot and everything. It looked like it was going to be really a solid weekend. He's starting P2, front row of the grid, all the opportunity in the world ahead of him, and he just continued to slide further and further back throughout the race. You end up with Max finishing higher than him, who when Max started down in P11. I think Sergio had the better tire allotment as well. Max had 2 sets of mediums and 1 set of hards. I believe Sergio had 1 set of mediums and 2 sets of hard tires, which seemed to be the optimal tire on the weekend.
Okay.
So, and even looking at kind of how he drove throughout the race, he didn't have any contact. He didn't have any big mistakes or anything on the track, but he just wasn't really defending any of the positions that he was holding. The second pit stop was a bit early, so it was a long stint on the hards at the end of the race, but George was on hards at the end of the race and defending like a maniac on his teammate, on Lewis. And the dirty air seemed super hard for people to make overtakes in. Oscar was struggling to get by Leclerc for a while, which kind of took him out of the contention for the win there at the end. Max was stuck behind Leclerc for a long time as well, just with the dirty air and everything. But anytime someone came up behind Checo, they seemed to just breeze by him super easily, and I don't know if that was him not taking good enough care of his tires and whatnot. But I mean, it's a decent points finish and everything. Gets P7 overall, but I mean, he got P7 last week as well, starting much lower on the grid than he did this weekend.
Yeah, a lot of those points I definitely agree with. It was surprising to see how strong he was in qualifying, and then seemed to just totally lack the race pace compared to the other, drivers that were going to be around him and the other cars that were going to be around him. Yeah, I think he may have been a little. Uh,
I maybe he was overly cautious. Maybe it was a car setup thing. I really don't know. I know Red Bull went with a higher downforce wing on the weekend, that was supposed to help with their tire deg, but was a little worse for them with like top speeds and all. Maybe
gotcha.
that was part of the components with it. But I mean, last week he goes from P16 up to P7. This week he goes from P2 down to P7. I just, I don't know. Maybe that's where the Red Bull's supposed to be, when we're comparing between the different teams at this point. Maybe it is a P5, P6, P7 kind of car, and Max is just driving the wheels off it. But it was I was disappointed. I was really hoping that he could just pull out like a P3, a nice little podium or something like that, starting that high on the grid.
Sure, and just like really convert that position. I guess my angle is like in a scenario where it feels very dire. The conversation sounds quite dire around him and the position, or the seat that he's occupying. It just felt like going into the summer break, especially with the recency bias that people have in Formula One, it just seemed like a solid enough result where he didn't have any like ugly moments throughout the rest of the weekend. Kind of. Mistake-less overall. Maybe didn't have the pace overall. Maybe a car setup problem, but wasn't causing headaches for Red Bull going into a long break. Like that would have been the worst thing ever if he leaves on some like really not leaves, but like they go on break on some really awful note. So maybe from a like results based viewpoint, yeah, not the greatest, and I can totally agree with like him being kind of a loser in this scenario. But I think from a long haul season perspective, from the conversation perspective that's being had around him immediately, I think it's like a solid enough, a good enough result, and for him personally, likely a pretty solid morale boost that like he is able to avoid mistakes. Not saying that
Yeah,
it must have been weighing on him in any way, but just getting a nice solid drive in on a really demanding tough track that's just got to feel good going into a break, knowing that you're definitely under the microscope for sure. So I think from that angle it's kind of how I was looking at it, to say like
yeah,
he had a solid weekend in my book, and that might be the idea that you hit on that we may have to get used to is yeah, I don't think the Red Bull is the fastest car right now. I don't think it's even the second fastest car right now.
yeah.
And maybe Sergio is just like he's driving it perfectly reasonably.
Yeah, and it was good in terms of like loss mitigation as well. They with Max starting in P11, they only lose 9 points to McLaren on the weekend. I think in the constructors fight, they still have a 42-point lead. So if Max is able to start up in higher positions, like where he qualified and everything, then it really doesn't look as bad overall. I feel like just, and I mean, obviously I have a little bit of bias, but as a Red Bull fan, like I wanted Checo to make up the difference this weekend.
Sure.
I mean, especially with his qualifying performance. Like he had a great qualifying. Like I don't want to knock him too hard, but yeah, just wish he could have kept that position and had an even stronger run into the summer break here.
Yeah, I can definitely agree with the like the fan sentiment in in that regard. I do think it's interesting that both of us had the same individual for like both sides of the coin. That's pretty funny.
Yeah, I think we've done that a couple times. It's funny that, but I think that's why we have these conversations. It kind of leaves the door open for us to have some interesting chats about the different drivers on the grid. But let's look over at the winners this weekend. Who did you have over there?
So talked about it. Sergio Perez was my number one, and my number two is gonna be Oscar Piastri. I think you could go either way, especially if you if you put a lot of weight on driver interviews. I think you could be led to believe like, oh man, I think that was rough. But no, I think Piastri's performance in the race specifically was really solid. I appreciated the amount of overtakes that he had to do to like further increase his race position, like end race position. So I thought that was huge for him. So yeah, Piastri is my second winner.
Yeah, and he was my second winner as well. I felt like he had strong pace, made a lot of good moves, and I was just overall I've been super impressed with his consistency and strength in his drives over the season. Really, he's shown a lot of really good performances. Even looking at the last 7 races, I saw a graphic. So the top 10 or the top 3 point scorers over the past 7 races are Max with 116 points, Lewis with 115 points,
Whoa.
and Oscar with 114 points.
Whoa. Our
So
boy on level with Max and Lewis.
yeah, and
Wow.
Lando's at 98, so he's 16 points back from how Oscar's been performing over the past 7 weeks. Which I mean, still he's fourth in this in points over the last, which is why McLaren as a whole has made such a huge jump. But when you look at it in that kind of breakdown and everything, it really shows how consistent Oscar has been through this middle stretch of the season, and he's looking just extremely strong. And another strong drive this weekend.
Yeah, definitely agree. I mean, it puts him in grabbing distance of both Charles and Lando ahead of him in the driver's standings, and we still have a lot of races to go, and it doesn't feel like McLaren's results are track based at all. It seems like they are just producing a very fast car right now. So you
Yeah.
have to imagine um, this may be risky in the sport that we're talking about, but it seems like they are slated for points at almost every upcoming race weekend we have now.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder, or it makes me wonder, just looking at like Red Bull last year and everything, we saw that they were insanely strong through a large part of the season, and then all of a sudden they have a big, just brutal weekend in Singapore. Some other struggles with a couple of the other later tracks in the season that I think were a bit more heat related and everything with the car and whatnot. But I'm curious. McLaren put together such a strong overall car that it doesn't seem to have any glaring weaknesses. I'm curious if there will be a weekend like that where a track is just outside of their car's windows and they have a real tough race. But at this point, I agree, it may be a cast or curse or jinx or whatever. But I've been super impressed with their progress on the car, and I mean they're very much in the constructors fight at this point.
Yeah, and I think that's really exciting, especially with the amount of races that we have yet to go. It really feels like there's kind of all to play for, and this weekend's race from Oscar kind of made me think about all these possibilities for McLaren and just how exciting that would be for them and for the sport to have another let's say legacy constructor bring themselves back into a a contention to win a championship. That's like super exciting for the sport.
Yeah, I mean, this week we had just a very competitive field in that top half of the grid where we are seeing four different teams be in contention for the race win at some point in time. Sergio early on, Leclerc held the lead for quite some time. Oscar was rapidly gaining on drivers in the later stint, and then Mercedes getting the win. My second winner being Lewis Hamilton, but just because he put together such a solid drive. He looked so good all race long, very strong with his defenses, just no mistakes. Kind of what you were saying about Sergio. It was clinical from Lewis, and at the end he didn't get over aggressive and make any mistakes that would have caused any sort of incident with George. He gets fortunate, of course, with with George being disqualified in terms of him getting a win. But, I mean, even a P2 with the way he drove was phenomenal. The Mercedes and their drivers looked just on top all weekend or all race day. So a really impressive drive from Lewis to get the win. I only leave George out because he had the disqualification. So yeah, a big weekend for Mercedes going into the break, and yeah, just a super competitive top of the grid at the moment.
Yeah, and especially like, and it's both drivers from each of the teams, which is really exciting. It's not just one of each or two from this one and blah blah blah. With Sergio, you want to just include him for like old times sake. Like he's kind of good for it. He's just going through hard times right now. We just pay his meal this time. Like it's fine.
Yeah, he'll get you back
that's
down the road.
Right. I think that's where we're at in that kind of angle. But yeah, it is exciting to see both, for the most part, both drivers for these constructors being quite competitive. Just to kind of tag on Lewis's race, it was really exciting to see them have a solid qualifying, and then also for the race, it seemed like a weekend where maybe teams and drivers had to decide like, okay, good qualifying position, but compromise our race. Compromise qualifying, but we'll be able to make it back up in the race. It seemed like Mercedes, with both of their cars, was kind of able to get the better of that. As opposed to somebody like the Ferraris, like Charles, who he's qualifying on pole and ending. He ended the race P4. He kind of drifted back. So I wonder if that's like a question of setup, where he wanted to be able to nail the qualifying session. Obviously, the conditions were very different. So just curious kind of what goes on there, but Mercedes really understand. It seems like they have a really solid understanding of like how to prep for weekends, how to prep for like possible scenarios. And it seems like on this one here, they were able to get the better of the at least the Ferrari of Charles Leclerc, qualifying ahead of them, but throughout the race, able to make the different slash better strategy calls to put themselves ahead. So yeah, I think Lewis in that regard had a really strong race.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And it seemed like their car was just tuned up very well for both They had a good balance with qualifying and race pace, but just some other like little thing. I was a little. I'm slowly becoming more, and this is not a big knock, but I'm becoming more and more like disappointed with Lando's starts of races. I think it's been brought up a number of times recently with his starting in P1 and then Max like getting him at the first corner or whatever, or Oscar beating him out at the start of a race from a worse starting position and whatnot. And it happens again this weekend where Lando is starting up there in P4. He's ahead of Oscar in fifth, and he gets passed by Oscar and George pretty early in the race, and is kind of on the back foot. He gets stuck behind Max for a bit at another point of the race and everything, and ends up finishing behind Max. When Max is coming out, and obviously new engine probably is running a bit smoother than some of the used engines that the other guys have, but on the weekend to lose points to Max in the drivers' championship, for Max to extend the gap on a weekend that he takes a 10-place grid penalty is definitely disappointing a little bit for Lando's side. I mean, still a very, very solid race overall, but definitely not what he was looking for in terms of that driver's fight and trying to stick in that.
Oh yeah, obviously. I thought you were going to.
Yeah.
I thought there was more after saying stick in that. But yeah, there's a significant challenge that a driver makes for themselves when they're, going off that early in the race when you just lose out so much in those early phases of that first lap. So yeah, you just have to wonder what different a day could he have had if he's having these better starts. And what you're alluding to is it being more of a there's kind of like a pattern here now with him having strong other aspects to his racecraft, but maybe his starts are something that leave a little bit to be desired.
Yeah, that's just how it feels. I think it's been enough times that saying that isn't outrageous. I don't think it's a huge issue or anything like that, but something that has cost him in multiple instances that he could have finished higher because of it.
Yeah, and especially when he's right now main competition there for the drivers' championship. It's tough to lose out where Max is rarely going to make a mistake, kind of thing. So when you're giving them away like right in the early phases of a race, that's going to make it really hard to keep that fight going over the next bunch of races that they have if that part of his racecraft is lacking, where like right now it seems like there's a bunch of really quick starters at the front, right? That's not like where you want your deficit to be.
Yeah, it's the other guys up there are super strong in that. Lewis is always extremely quick on the starts. Max is strong, and Oscar's clearly shown that he's got good jumps as well at the start of the race. So it's something that I think if Lando improves, it's gonna just pull him back into the middle of that fight in every race instead of having a little bit of a one-off here, which even being a one-off, he ends up in P5 at the end after George gets DQ'd. But the only other notes that I really had, Daniel Ricciardo picks up the extra point on the weekend picks up P10 after George gets disqualified. And I felt like the Alpine with Ocon, he had really good pace. He was climbing through the field super well throughout the race. And so a very nice drive from him to end up there in P9 and picking up a couple points for Alpine.
Yeah, it's solid. Unfortunately, probably not indicative of like coming form or a pattern or anything like this. But yeah, a solid drive for drivers that it feels like right now are more looking for personal brand stock increases as opposed to maybe thinking about well, I'm Alpine till I die, right? It's just a solid result for him on the grid in comparison to the other drivers. I think it will it encourages someone to say like, oh yeah, this is a solid driver, deserves a seat. He's competitive. You know, we want to see him compete. So yeah, I would definitely agree. I think that's a solid drive for Ocon there in the Alpine.
Yeah, I'm with you, and I think he's definitely proven that he is at least close, if not on par with Gasly, and I think at this point they both are strong enough drivers to have seats. So I'm glad that to see him over in Haas for next season. But any other final notes here on the race weekend?
No, I don't think so. I believe most of what we've said on previous weekends kind of holds true for like your Aston Martins, your Kick Saubers, your Haas's here, and even for Haas less so, especially where previously we've had Hulkenberg able to do some maybe impressive things, but nothing really here, kind of in the back, but to be expected. I mean, honestly, I think this is like one of the toughest circuits. I think this is one of the toughest races of the year. I think it's just very demanding on the car, very demanding on the drivers. So not surprising that a team that's only had like kind of glimmers really just kind of back of the pack. That's not really surprising. So I think in a lot of regards like that, it would just be kind of reiterating things that we've said before about some of these other teams, where I think we're waiting on some maybe significant developments or significant flashes to really change the narrative for some of the other constructors that we have outside of the top five, really. Maybe outside of the top, to be fair, outside of the top seven, I think the narrative hasn't really changed.
Yeah, I would tend to agree, and it's just really these small pickups of points here and there. There haven't been any big swings necessarily. Outside of maybe, say, Haas. Outside of the top seven, with Haas being in seventh, having really improved their performance and their development on the car, working pretty well. But that wraps out our Belgian Grand Prix review here. But getting into the cool down lap for this week, we had the Rose, Thorn, and Seed section or segment. So, do you want to lead us off here, Justin?
Yeah, let's do it. I'll just hit you with a couple of short ones here because my Rose, it's a little interesting. So my Thorn here, just thinking of the summer break here coming up for Formula One. It's going to be a long couple of weeks, I'm sure, without our beloved motorsport. So that's going to be tough. So big Thorn on my side. Seed for the week, we were back at the Commander table this week, so that was really fun. Just getting some games in. Seeing the boys back in action, so that was a good time. Just playing some Commander. But my Rose here, I'm gonna talk about the Esports World Cup. It's percolating, man, and it's like kind of exciting. So the more I'm like paying attention to it, the more I'm kind of understanding what's going on. And also, it's allowed me to kind of like check in on, or get a taste of some other esports that like I've never really been exposed to. Like this past week, they had the Overwatch 2 event.
Okay.
So I tuned into some of those matches, and that was a just a whirlwind of, man, just like learning all these new things. I think the attachment point, the thing that I was really able to get in behind, and let me know what you think about this. So, do you remember? He would have been an LCK caster, I'm pretty sure. His tag was Achilleos. He was the
Hmm.
play-by-play for,
Yeah,
I believe, LCK, right?
I think so. Yeah.
So he was doing the cast for Overwatch 2. I think he's since like changed his like main esport. They had them doing back to back best of 7 series, and not just on the day. Like they were casting multiple days in a row, doing multiple series per day.
Holy cow. That's
Bro,
that's a
yeah.
doozy.
It was a lot. It was a lot for I'm pretty sure they only had 2 casting duos for the whole gamut, or maybe it was 3 or 4, right? But yeah, so I really appreciated Achilleos casts, and like it helped learn about the game, this esport that I knew nothing about. But that's just the Overwatch 2. The more I'm thinking about it and the more I'm looking, like now we're getting into some of like the bigger games, some of the more exciting games that I'm going to look forward to checking out. We've still got like a whole Call of Duty tournament. There's Apex Legends. We've got Rainbow Six Siege. And I was thinking, and this is where I'll bring you into it. I was thinking, okay, T1, they win the League of Legends tournament, but like, how many other esports are they actually in? Turns out they have players or teams in a couple other games that will be hosted at the Esports World Cup. So
Nice.
there's actually some more positions for T1 to rake in some points, and that's kind of where I'm really looking. But yeah, it's just been really fun to kind of just check out esports in general in this like really exciting new format. So that's kind of been on my mind.
Very cool. No, I like that a lot. I've like picked up little bits and pieces here and there. I saw Overwatch is so hard for me to watch just because there's so much going on and they're flipping from character to character and I know nothing about them.
Right.
It would take me probably the entire tournament to kind of figure out the different characters and everything that you can play as, but very cool to get the opportunity to check out a lot of these esports in this all in the same like motivation for watching it like it this
Mm-hmm.
whole tournament and everything kind of gives you that reason to pay attention and check out something new a little bit, so that's cool.
Yeah, because like it may not be your esport, but like, oh, you definitely know the organizations. Like it
Oh
was
yeah.
Virtus Pro versus like Fnatic. It was,
Yeah.
like orgs and teams that you can like really get behind. So yeah, I think that's really exciting. I will look to keep tabs in the future, but I'm excited to hear about your Rose Thorn and Seed here for the week.
Yeah, so I'll keep it pretty short, but with the Rose, I'm just excited. The wedding's 11 days away now, so it's coming up so quickly. Time's flying. We're almost there, and just a couple last things to just small little things to get our ducks in a row and everything. So looking forward to that. It's gonna be the best. But my one thorn is that now that we've hit this summer break and everything, we've got a decent bit of a stretch here until we have more F1. Plus, with the wedding and me being away, we probably won't have much summer break podcasting or too much news over the next couple of weeks. But I am very much with my seed, just looking forward to the second half of the season. We're going to be doing some live watch alongs on Twitch, which I think we've got set up now pretty well with the Twitch stream. So I'm excited for that with the podcast. It's going to be a blast, and we have a lot of excitement ahead of us for this F1 season. So it's really shaping out to be one of the best seasons we've had. This and 2021 are probably the most exciting seasons that you and I have watched. So very much just looking forward to that for the rest of the year.
Yeah, I would say pretty solid. Yeah, it's gonna be a long time without Formula One. I agree, but yeah, looking forward to at least getting one or two live watch-alongs here on Twitch in the second half of the season. We'll figure out what that's gonna look like. But yeah, I think that'd be exciting to try and incorporate.
Definitely. So, but that wraps us out for this week with the cool down lap. Been another fun episode, and we'll definitely be looking forward to putting out more episodes once we get back from the summer break. But we hope everyone is on the edge of their seats as well for the rest of the season.
Yeah, I know. I know I am. That's for sure. I just wanted to thank everybody. If you're tuning into the live stream, thank you for everybody. If you're tuning into the episode afterwards on the podcast version, just wanted to say thank you very much for taking the time to listen. We appreciate you very much. New episodes after every Formula One weekend, so check in after each and every Formula One race weekend for a new episode of the Tyred Boys podcast. We appreciate you.
Yep, we'll catch you next time.
Peace out, everyone.